growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all? This is the very reason why everyone who originally worked on and set up Invictus no longer works there.
The 14th of March 2024. Write that date down. That's the day Meghan Markle dropped a soft, dreamy, black and white video on Instagram flowers, a wooden spoon, a cursive logo that read American Riviera Orchard. Her lifestyle brand, jam, honey, the whole living beautifully in the hills fantasy. It looked gorgeous, it felt curated, and it was very, very well timed. Now write down a second date. The 3rd of May 2024. That's the day the Attorney General of California declared the Archwell Foundation her charity, the one she runs with Harry Delinquent. Ordered it to stop collecting money, stop spending it. Full stop. 7 weeks apart. 7! She launched a jam empire and the state of California slammed the brakes on her charity practically in the same breath. Let that sink in. And while everyone else is pushing a Harry story, his face on the thumbnail, his name in the title, Harry's soaking up the $63 million Invictus heat like he's standing in a storm alone. Nobody's talking about the person quietly building something else on the side. Nobody's asking the harder question. She just sold some jam. What's the big deal? Stay with me, because once you find out how many people actually sit on the board of that charity, the word oversight is going to mean absolutely nothing to you. The number is almost a joke. Here's what you're getting. By the end of this, you'll read these filings like an auditor. You'll know the dates. You'll know which document California is still waiting on. And you'll understand why one person in this partnership walked away spotless while the other took every single hit. This isn't gossip.
Harry has to go to Birmingham this summer. He has to drum up some sort of business because at this point, A, it's just embarrassing. And B, yes, government funds are supposed to cover about half, but the other half are supposed to come from private companies and private individuals. And nobody's dropping a dime anymore because they are also saying, how come this costs so much money?
This is paperwork, and paperwork doesn't cry on Oprah. So why now? Because the timeline finally locked shut, and when that happens, the full picture snaps into focus. 2 weeks ago, Australia cut every dollar of federal funding to Invictus Australia. Gone. Roughly $3 million a year, wiped out in a single budget line on May 12th. The charity's own CEO said they were left in a fair degree of shock, finding out just hours before it went public. Then veterans got loud. They went on national television. The government reversed course, 3 more years of funding restored. Fans called it a win. Harry saves the day. Sweet story. But back up. Look at what that whole situation actually exposed. A sitting government looked at the Invictus operation, looked at the books, and decided even briefly that this wasn't the best use of veterans' money. That's not a tabloid. That's elected officials with real numbers in front of them making a call. Then Canadian investigator Rachel Maxwell pulled the actual government contracts for the 2025 Games, not rumors contracts. What she found was a $63.2 million bill for 543 wounded veterans. Run the math. That's roughly $118,000 per competitor. The US Warrior Games, same concept. Wounded service members. Athletic competition runs on about $2 million a year. $2 million. So the question stops being,
the final traces of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the British royal family are being erased. And this is far more significant than just the destruction of their former home.
Harry and Meghan have actively been trying to replicate the very life that they had supposedly walked away from.
Is this charitable? It becomes, where did the money actually go? And once you start pulling that thread on one Sussex organisation, it doesn't stay there. It travels straight to Archwell. And once it lands at Archwell, you have to ask the one question almost nobody is asking out loud. Where was Meghan while all of this was being built? Because this isn't embarrassing like a bad photo. This is a state attorney general, a charity watchdog, and blacked out government contracts all pointing at the same family at the same time. That's a different level entirely. 5 exhibits. Follow the dates. Exhibit 1. The two-person boardroom. Who's watching the money at Archewell? Who's the independent set of eyes making sure no one's mixing personal business with charitable funds? Two people, Meghan and Harry. That's the entire board. The watchdog group Charity Watch put it plainly. The foundation reports only 2 board members, a setup that falls well short of widely accepted non-profit governance best practices. No independent trustee, no outside voice, nobody. Think about what that actually means. There is no one at that table who can look the founders in the eye and say no. If Meghan wanted to spend the back half of 2024 building a lifestyle brand instead of running a charity, who was going to stop her? The other board member, her own husband? That's not a charity structure. That's a household with a tax exemption stapled to it. Bad, but not the worst part. Because an empty boardroom only becomes dangerous once the money starts moving. And this money was bleeding. Exhibit 2.
And now I think the story really is, over how the last 5 years, how they have sought to make their fortune.
We are witnessing the collapse of the Harry and Meghan project in real time.
The $3 million hole. Here are the 2024 numbers straight from the filing. Money in, $2.1 million. Money out, $5.1 million. That's a $3 million gap in a single year, spending more than double what they raised. And it's not like the well was always this dry. Back in 2021, the charity pulled in $13 million. Then it cratered to $2 million in 2022. Across the next 3 years combined, it raised about $9.5 million total, less than what it pulled in during that one opening year alone. That's not a slow fade. That's donor enthusiasm walking straight off a cliff. What was left was a charity burning $5 million a year it didn't have. In 2023, they raised over $5 million, and only about $1.3 million of it actually reached charitable causes. The rest got consumed. Staff, consultants, operations, those high-profile trips to Nigeria and Colombia. Publicist Brian Glicklick said it sharper than most the public. He said, sees it as a self-serving publicity mechanism for the couple and a means of platforming other money-making ventures. A platform for other money-making ventures. Lock that phrase in your memory, because the real problem isn't the spending. The real problem is hiding inside one little checked box on the tax form itself. Exhibit 3, the audit that doesn't exist. On its federal tax form, the 990 Archewell checked the box, stating its finances are independently audited by an accountant. Great. Wonderful. So, Charity Watch asked to see it. In writing, by mail.
She had been dubbed Duchess Difficult again. There have been allegations of bullying.
Tyrant in high heels.
But I have to just say, anyone who has doubted me over the past decade about this evil woman now needs to eat some humble pie.
The 22nd of January 2024. Silence. They asked again the 6th of December 2024. Silence. Then a third time, the 6th of January 2026. Still silence. 3 letters. 2 years. Nothing. If you've got a clean, independent audit sitting in a drawer, the one document that proves every dollar is exactly where you swore it was, and the most credible charity watchdog in America writes 3 separate times asking to see it, why would you not just send it? There are only 2 possible answers. Either the audit is perfectly clean and you're holding it back for no reason, which makes 0 sense, or it isn't. Charity Watch couldn't even issue a rating. They stated plainly that the organization doesn't meet basic transparency benchmarks. A charity that won't show its books to the one group whose entire job is reading books. And if a missing audit sounds bad, wait until you see what a state attorney general can actually do. Stay with me. Exhibit 4, the delinquency notice and the date right before it. Back to the timeline. This is the one that matters. The 3rd of May, 2024. California declares Archewell delinquent. Stop collecting donations. Stop spending funds. The official reason? A check that supposedly never arrived. Maybe. But a state attorney general doesn't make that move over one lost envelope unless the paperwork is already shaking. Now drop a pin. 7 weeks earlier, the 14th of March, 2024, American Riviera Orchard launches. Picture the split screen. On the left, Meghan on Instagram, picking flowers, mailing jars of strawberry jam to celebrity friends.
A furious King Charles has decided to completely remove all traces of Harry and his time at Frogmore Cottage. Harry and Meghan spent heavily on turning the property into their family base, and the UK taxpayer had to foot the bill. $3.2 million. This is money that the British people don't have.
Building a brand she literally described as an extension of me. On the right, the shared charity, 2 board members, a $3 million gap, about to get flagged by the state. Same woman, same months, one project getting everything, the other left to drift. Then it quietly got worse. That California registration didn't just get fixed and forgotten, it lapsed again. Expired the 15th of May, 2025. The most recent filing on record only runs through the end of 2023. 2 separate regulatory failures in 2 years on the same charity, and the brand never missed a beat. As ever launched, sold out in under an hour, kept dropping new products right on schedule. One of these operations was run like a serious business, the other was run like an afterthought. You can decide which was which. That's a pattern, but every pattern needs its final piece. Because when the heat got too high, they didn't fix it. They restructured it. And the restructure, coldest, most calculated move in this entire story. Exhibit 5. The vanishing act they called fiscal sponsorship. The 19th of December, 2025. The announcement drops. The Archewell Foundation is becoming Archewell Philanthropies. Sounds like a glow-up, right? Fresh name, bigger vision. The statement said it would allow the couple and their children to expand upon their global philanthropic endeavors as a family. Expand. Read that word one more time. Now look at what was actually happening the same week that statement went out. 3 staff members, more than half the workforce cut, including the director of programs and operations, the person who actually ran the day-to-day, pulling $146,000 a year. Gone. The longtime executive director, James Holt, who had been with them since the wedding day, quietly packed up and headed back to the UK. And donations? Collapsed from $5.3 million down to $2.1 million. You don't expand by gutting your staff and watching the money disappear. That's not expansion. That's a retreat with a really good publicist. But here's the part that should raise every hair on your arms. The new structure isn't just a name change, it's a fiscal sponsorship model. And in plain English, that model typically reports less to the public than a standalone foundation does. So right at the moment, scrutiny peaks, the deficit, the missing audit, the delinquency, the Invictus questions, all stacking up at once. They reorganize into a structure that makes the books harder to read. The transparency didn't improve. It went dark on purpose, wrapped in the warmest possible language. As a family, think carefully about what that phrase actually protects. It folds the entire operation into a private family matter. Family is sacred. Family is off limits. Family doesn't get audited by strangers. That's Exhibit 5. Now let me tell you who actually paid for all of it, because underneath these numbers, there are real people. And people are usually where the truth leaks out. James Holt. This man was there from day one. He stood in Windsor on the wedding day in 2018. When Harry and Meghan stepped away from the monarchy in 2020, Holt crossed an ocean with them. He helped navigate the Oprah interview. He moved to California to help run the charity. People close to the operation said he may have been the only aide left who truly understood firsthand what those two had lived through inside that palace. He stayed through everything, the attacks, the headlines, the relentless staff turnover, year after year. Then, in December 2025, when the cuts came, the deficit was exposed, and the foundation quietly shrank into something dimmer. James Holt went home to the UK to raise his family. No tell-all. No sit-down interview. No torching the place on his way out. He just left, and sometimes the loudest statement a person can make is leaving quietly after 7 years. That silence from the one man who had been there since the very beginning says everything the press releases are working overtime to bury. He wasn't the only one who walked. The program's director, out. And the pattern runs deeper than a few departures by some counts. Over 20 people have exited the Sussex operation since day one. One royal source didn't sugarcoat it. They churn through staff faster than normal people churn through toilet paper. These weren't entry-level hires. These were seasoned professionals who left stable careers because they believed in something real. One by one, they got close enough to see the difference between the mission on paper and the operation actually running, and they chose themselves. Then comes Centervale, the charity Harry personally built in 2006 as a tribute to his late mother. Its chairwoman, Dr. Sophie Shandowka, a practicing lawyer and genuine insider, revealed that Harry's team came knocking and asked the charity to publicly defend Meghan against bad press. She shut it down cold. Her exact words, "We're not setting a precedent by which we become an extension of the Sussex PR machine." This wasn't a blogger with a grudge. This was the woman sitting at the head of the board. Every person with a front row seat kept reaching the same conclusion. That pattern alone should make you stop and think. Now here's where it stops being messy and starts being serious. A California delinquency order isn't a slap on the wrist, it's the state yanking your right to operate. And the question regulators are trained to ask is simple. Did anything move while that order was active? Any dollar raised or spent during a delinquency window is a potential violation of state charity law. Then it lapsed again in 2025. 2 strikes on the same charity. Regulators don't grade on a curve for repeat situations like that. Layer the federal filing on top. Archwell checked a box on the 990 swearing an independent audit exists. Charity Watch wrote 3 times over 2 years asking to see it. 3 times, nothing came back. When what you certify on a federal document can't be backed up with actual paperwork, that's not just a transparency issue. That's the kind of problem that lands on an IRS desk and doesn't quietly disappear. And right in the middle of all that heat, they restructured, moved into a fiscal sponsorship model, one that, by design, surfaces less information to the public than a standard foundation. Think about the timing. The scrutiny was at its peak, and the response was to build a structure that shows less. That's not a coincidence. That's a blueprint. Compliance attorneys will tell you straight regulators recognize that defensive move immediately, and it doesn't make them walk away. It makes them dig harder. Now cut to the business side, because these 2 stories were never actually separate. Netflix was the financial backbone of the entire Montecito operation. 9 figures. Everything ran on that infrastructure. Then, on the 6th of March 2026, Netflix quietly pulled out of the as-ever brand deal, returned the remaining inventory, and disappeared without a single dramatic statement. No fight, no announcement. Just gone, and that kind of silent exit hits different than a public blow-up. A loud split gives both sides something to say. A quiet one leaves a question no one wants to touch. Why did a company that handed over $100 million decide to simply walk away without explanation? String it all together and the picture gets uncomfortable fast. Donor confidence cratered, the flagship media partnership evaporated, and now the lifestyle brand, the jam, the honey, the whole sunlit California image has to carry itself alone, in front of an audience actively reading about charity delinquencies, missing audits, and government contracts with entire sections blacked out. That's not just bad timing. That's a reputational perfect storm hitting a brand built entirely on the idea that you can trust the person selling it to you. Because that's what a lifestyle brand actually sells. Not the product, the person, the values, the story. The feeling that the woman stirring that jam pot has her life together in a way you want yours to look. The moment that image cracks, the product doesn't just lose sales, it loses its entire reason to exist. Credibility and commerce are the same thing here, and you can't firewall one from the other. One royal source boiled it down raw. This isn't strategy, it's survival. Growth looks like expanding your board, publishing clean audits, and building programs with staying power. Survival looks like shrinking the structure, clearing out the people who know where everything is buried, and betting on the news cycle moving before the next deadline lands. And the most troubling thread of all the Invictus licensing fees, roughly $30 million of Canadian public money flowed through a games corporation that paid a licensing fee straight back to the Invictus Games Foundation. That fee? Redacted. Completely blacked out in documents that exist specifically because the public paid for them. You don't get to cash public checks and then hide the receipt. That's not a technicality, that's a betrayal of the entire premise of public accountability. Here's what that redaction actually signals beyond the dollar amount. Organizations with clean books don't typically fight to keep fee structures buried. When you've got nothing to hide, transparency costs you nothing. It actually works in your favor. But the instinct to black out, restructure, and go silent precisely when the questions get loudest, that instinct is its own kind of answer, even when the documents refuse to give you one. So here's the verdict. Not a drama recap, not a tweet timeline, a verdict built on filings, dates, and the behavior of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Everyone wants to frame this as the Harry show, and on the surface, that story practically writes itself. His name is stamped on Invictus. His face is attached to the $63 million figure. Every camera, every wave of criticism, every uncomfortable question landed directly on him. He stood in the middle of it and absorbed the hit, whether that was his choice or someone else's design. But the dates don't have feelings. They don't have publicists. Go back to them one final time. March 2024, a dreamy lifestyle brand launches with flowers, a cursive logo, and a carefully curated Instagram video. May 2024, the shared charity gets declared delinquent by the state of California, ordered to freeze donations and spending. Same woman. 7 weeks. One project received every ounce of creative energy and personal attention available. The other was hemorrhaging $3 million a year with 2 board members and an audit nobody could produce. Then 2025, the charity registration lapses again. Not a first-time mistake, again, while the brand is selling out in under an hour and dropping new products like clockwork. Then December 2025, the foundation gets gutted, rebranded, and restructured into a model that by design shows the public less than before. Staff slashed. The executive director, who had been there since the wedding day, quietly packed up and went home. And the language wrapped around all of it? Expansion, family, legacy. The warmest possible words stretched over the coldest possible math. Through every single one of those pivots, every regulatory stumble, every staff exit, every delinquency notice, every lapsed filing, every document that never arrived, Meghan's name stayed clean. It stayed on the side of the honey jars and the coastal California aesthetic. The charity absorbed every hit. The brand kept its glow. That split didn't happen by accident. Patterns this consistent, sustained across this many years and this many separate organizations, do not happen by accident. Now here's the part that deserves to sit with you long after this ends. James Holt, the man who crossed an ocean for this operation, who weathered every headline and every internal storm for 7 straight years, left without saying a single word publicly. No interview, no book deal, no carefully placed quote in a tabloid. He just went home. And in a world where everyone eventually talks, where everyone finds a way to cash in on proximity to this family, that silence isn't nothing. That silence is an entire chapter nobody has been able to read. Dr. Sophie Shanduka, chairwoman of Centre Ballet, the charity Harry built in 2006 to honour his own mother, said directly that Harry's team approached her organisation and asked it to defend Meghan against negative press coverage. She drew a hard line. Her exact words, "We're not setting a precedent by which we become an extension of the Sussex PR machine." That wasn't an outside critic taking shots. That was the person running the board from the inside, using a charity built around vulnerable people to say, "Not here, not like this, not on my watch." Over 20 people have now cycled out of the Sussex operation. Not interns, not junior staffers, senior professionals who restructured their entire lives around a stated mission they genuinely believed in. And one by one, every single one of them reached a point where what was being asked of them stopped matching what they had signed up for, and they walked. That's not normal turnover. That consistent pattern of people with the clearest view deciding they had seen enough, that is information. And information, unlike press releases, doesn't have a spin cycle. Because when you stop examining each piece separately and start seeing the full architecture, this is what's actually standing in front of you. A charity run by 2 people with 0 independent oversight. A federal filing certifying an audit that vanished across 3 separate requests and 2 full years. A state delinquency landing 7 weeks after a lifestyle brand launch. A lapsed registration that repeated itself 12 months later. A restructure into a less transparent model timed precisely to peak regulatory heat. A 9-figure commercial partnership that quietly ghosted. A licensing fee buried inside a public government contract. And a trail of senior staff who knew the most and said the absolute least on their way out. Not one of those things alone closes the case, but lined up in order, mapped against each other, read the way an auditor reads them rather than the way a fan reads them. They describe an organization that was always serving 2 masters, and one of those masters consistently got more every single time. Here's the question that should be keeping someone specific up at night. If the audit is clean, send it. 3 requests, 2 years, 1 envelope. That's the entire ask. If the licensing fee is fair, proportionate, and represents genuine value delivered to wounded veterans, unredact it. That money came from Canadian taxpayers. It passed through a public government contract. The people who funded it don't just have a right to see where it landed, they were promised that right the moment it became a public transaction. Hiding it isn't a legal technicality. It's a broken promise to the exact community the organization claims to serve. And if the pivot to fiscal sponsorship is genuinely about expanding impact rather than contracting legal exposure, prove it. Not with a press release full of warm language about family and legacy, with specific numbers, with named programs, with measurable outcomes that show concretely how the new structure puts more resources into real causes than the old one did. That's not an unreasonable ask. That's the bare minimum any charitable organization owes the public that trusted it with their money. None of that has happened, and when transparency stays permanently off the table, the only tool left is pattern recognition. So look at the pattern honestly. Every time scrutiny increased, the organizational response made the books harder to read, not easier. Every structural change moved information further from public view, not closer. The people with the deepest institutional knowledge, the ones who had been inside the operation long enough to know exactly where every dollar traveled, chose silence on their way out. Every single one of them. That consistency is not random. That is a coordinated relationship with information, and it only runs in one direction. Think about what it takes to maintain that across multiple organizations, multiple regulatory jurisdictions, multiple staff cycles, and multiple years. This isn't one bad filing or one overlooked deadline. This is a sustained pattern of behavior that repeats itself under pressure. And pressure is exactly the right word because every one of these moments happened when someone external was asking hard questions. The delinquency came when California was already looking. The restructure came when the deficit, the missing audit, and the Invictus contracts all landed in the same news cycle. The staff cuts came when the financial reality could no longer be managed with language alone. That timing is not coincidental. Organizations that are caught off guard make chaotic, reactive moves. Organizations that are managing a narrative make calculated, strategic ones. Every move here, the rebranding, the fiscal sponsorship pivot, the warm language about family expansion wrapped around a gutted staff, has the fingerprints of calculation on it. And calculated moves are made by people who understand exactly what is at stake. Now, step back even further and look at who absorbed what. Harry's name is on Invictus. Harry's face took every camera. Harry stood publicly in the middle of the $63 million question and fielded every wave of criticism that came with it. From the outside, this looks like one person carrying the weight of 2. But weight distribution in a 2-person operation with a 2-person board doesn't happen organically. Someone decides who faces the cameras and who faces the spreadsheets. Someone decides which name goes on the foundation filing and which name goes on the lifestyle brand. Someone decided that one partner would be publicly synonymous with the charitable work, while the other built a separate commercial identity that could stay insulated from the institutional fallout. That separation clean brand on one side, regulatory turbulence on the other, did not maintain itself. It was maintained, and the person best positioned to maintain it was the one whose name never appeared on the documents that attracted the most scrutiny. Here's what makes this genuinely different from ordinary celebrity drama. Celebrity drama fades. A bad interview, a feuding family, even a public falling out, those things have a shelf life. People move on, the algorithm buries it, but regulatory and legal exposure doesn't follow the news cycle. The IRS doesn't forget that a box was checked on a 990 certifying an audit that nobody has been able to produce. California doesn't reset the clock because the headlines moved on. A redacted public contract doesn't unredact itself because a new product line launched and sold out in an hour. The paperwork exists independently of the public narrative. It accumulates, it compounds. And the people whose job it is to read it, regulators, auditors, investigators, are not distracted by Instagram aesthetics or lifestyle branding. They read what was filed, they compare it to what was produced, they notice the gaps, and they are significantly more patient than any news cycle has ever been. So, what happens next? That's the question nobody in the immediate orbit of this story wants to answer out loud. The commercial backbone is already gone, Netflix walked away quietly in March 2026, and quiet exits from nine-figure partnerships don't happen without serious, internal conversations that we will likely never fully hear about. The charitable infrastructure is restructured into something smaller, less visible, and harder to scrutinize from the outside. The staff who could have provided the clearest institutional picture are gone. The documents that could settle the core questions remain either missing or redacted. What's left is a brand, and a brand, without the infrastructure of credibility behind it, is just a logo on a jar. The entire value proposition of a lifestyle brand is built on the idea that the person behind it represents something aspirational, something trustworthy, something worth buying into beyond the product itself. That value doesn't survive indefinitely in an environment where the questions are this specific, this documented, and this unanswered. At some point, the gap between the aesthetic and the reality becomes too wide for even the most loyal audience to ignore. And that's the part of this story that goes beyond the headlines, beyond the filings, beyond even the regulatory exposure. This is about what happens when an institution and a personal brand is an institution loses the foundational trust that makes it function. Trust isn't rebuilt with a product launch or a rebrand or a carefully worded statement about family values. Trust is rebuilt with receipts, with audits, with transparency that costs something because it reveals something, with the willingness to answer the hard questions even when the answers are uncomfortable. None of those receipts have been offered, and every day that passes without them, the questions don't soften, they sharpen, because the people asking them are no longer just commentators and critics. They are investigators, regulators, and journalists with the specific tools and legal authority to go places that public opinion cannot. And those people operate on a timeline that has nothing to do with the social media cycle or the next product drop. Here is what this story ultimately comes down to. Stripped of every layer of branding and narrative management, public money was spent. A public document certified something that cannot be verified. A public charity collected donations from people who believed in a stated mission. Those people, the donors, the taxpayers, the veterans whose names and service were attached to these organizations, deserve answers that have not been given. Not because it makes good content, not because it feeds a particular narrative about this family, but because accountability to the public is not optional when you are operating on public trust and public money. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. So drop your theory in the comments and make it specific. Which document do you think tells the most complete version of this story? Which name do you believe ends up attached to the chapter someone is working hardest to keep buried? And when this finally cracks all the way open, because financial and regulatory stories at this scale always do you think the person who absorbed every public hit was genuinely the one making every private call? Or was that arrangement deliberate? Every comment gets read. The sharpest ones shape what comes next, and what comes next goes deeper than anything covered here. If this opened your eyes, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who has only been handed the surface version of this story. Subscribe so you're here when the follow-up drops. See you in the next one!